Hello, welcome to my Japan strategy video for Path to Victory. This is an Axis and Allies mod if you're not familiar with it, developed by the Nerd Herd, led by Adam514 on the axisandallies.org forums. GeneralDisarray and Regular Kid are two other prominent contributors that I know off the top of my head. I will link to the League forums below. This video is going to be discussing the opportunity Japan has to execute an attack on all the allies or a selective attack on just the United Kingdom and ANZAC on turn 2. Your first turn, you will be moving several pieces down south to threaten ANZAC. This is an ANZAC crush strategy, so the main focus of your early aggression will be all of the ANZAC territories on the board, while maintaining enough units to keep the United States fleet at Pearl Harbor at bay, preferably out of C-Zone 27 and actually in C-Zone 28 over here, behind Hawaii. I'm using French pieces for Marines for the United States, and I'm using a German infantry for the Japanese Marine. Russia goes before Japan, and we're gonna go through this turn by turn. I've seen a couple different Russian setups in Siberia, but I'm going to go ahead and move these pieces to show you what I expect a typical Russian move will be if they are trying to maximize their threat on Japan's northern flank and maintain some of Japan's attention up there. As you can see, I've moved most of the Russian infantry back to Siberia. I've left some in Buryatia. I've seen this setup. I've seen basically everything go to Siberia that can, and 3 infantry in Buryatia. I've also seen players fully retreat to either Sakha or split between Sakha and Buryatia. On your first turn as Japan, I highly recommend purchasing 4 transports and an infantry. Going to make your standard attacks against China, gobbling up some territory there, and going all in on Yunnan with the 2 bombers from Japan and the 2 aircraft from Queensland. You only have 2 battles, one in Shanxi to the north and one in Yunnan to the south. You can choose to leave an infantry behind in Guangxi to help with a counterattack into Yunnan on turn 2. That is actually something that I frequently do. You could also move it into Hunan to get an extra IPC, or move it into the Yunnan attack to make it less likely that you'll need to take a fighter in order to secure the territory. On average, you will never need to take a fighter. However, sometimes this is a game of luck. Sometimes you will lose a fighter there, and so it's probably worth it to just take the extra infantry in. In Shanxi, I prefer to just take ground units in and leave Chahar empty. This allows me to use all of the air from southern Manchuria and Gyeongsu and get them to the Carolines to support the ANZAC crush. Last but most important to this strategy, you're going to take the Marine from the Carolines, put it on the cruiser, and come down and capture New Hebrides. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But you will take New Hebrides. You will also take French Indochina. This allows you to build infrastructure there on turn 2 if you choose to do so, as well as gives you 2 extra infantry to counterattack into Yunnan on turn 2. This is a quick snapshot of the board after combat moves. I'm going to just do average outcomes for the 2 battles and go over non-combat movement. We didn't talk about a bid very much here. I do prefer to bid at least 6 for this Japan strategy, as that will net you an extra transport I have not shown here, I'm going to show now. The extra transport placed in Season 7, you can use to pick up a tank and an infantry, the infantry from Hokkaido, and move that down to Season 37. And you can either land that in Guangxi or French Indochina, depending on your preference. I have not ever been attacked by the United Kingdom or ANZAC early using this strategy, but it is still young, and there is a chance that they would choose to do so in order to try to delay the inevitable, I suppose. However, that does come with the risk that the United States is not brought into the war, so I think that that as a counter is highly unlikely. Like I said, I will bring that transport down. We have either 4 or 5, depending on if you leave an infantry in Guangxi, ground units to counterattack into Yunnan. The average outcome is about 1.6 units killed by China in Yunnan. I went ahead and took 2 casualties there and 0 casualties up north in Shanxi. The 4 units in Shanxi really makes it so, yeah, even if you do get a hit, it's still not in China's interest to try to counterattack you there. If you only have 2 units there, and you have a weak enough force in Yunnan that they can just move in infantry, they might use their fighter to attack that spot with the 2 infantry up here in Inner Mongolia. The rest of the non-combat movements will be moving infantry into Anhui. I like to move 3 infantry and then 1 artillery in total into Qianxi here, so that I can attack Qingtung next turn with at least 2 infantry and an artillery and then some planes. The rest of these guys all going into Anhui. Anhui touches all of these territories, so it's a very good place to build up a force to threaten those adjacent spaces, and then eventually push into Hopai to crush Sichuan, ideally. China's not your main goal here, though, so you can maintain kind of a second perimeter just inside the coast. Over on the islands, I've moved the air that starts in Japan and in Season 7, most of it to the Marshall Islands. I put 3 pairs there personally of fighters and tacticals. These threaten Pearl Harbor and make it so that the United States cannot stack up a fleet there on the first turn. The airplanes from southern Manchuria have flown all the way down here and landed on the carriers from Season 7. These battleships, submarine, whatnot, you can kind of split them here. I like to put the majority of them in 34. Again, just keeps the US from even thinking about having a fleet there in Pearl Harbor. But you do want a couple units in 35 to support taking the Money Islands if you end up going that route. And this is a strategy that focuses on the potential of crushing ANZAC, but you want to make sure that you are flexible with Japan and can basically exploit any opportunities that you can. All right, I've completed the rest of my fleet movements. As you can see, I have moved the carrier and destroyer that were in Season 34 down to Season 54 here. That's not necessary. It does give you the option to threaten New Zealand a little bit more strongly. And I have seen players abandon New Zealand using the transport to pick up the New Zealand unit, infantry. However, I think most people will just let that infantry sit there and not worry too much about it. So in my opinion, moving the carrier down here and the destroyer is not necessary. And in fact, if you leave the cruiser alone and they decide to attack you, that is really good for Japan, because that means the US will not be able to come into the war until round 4 I'm going to go over a few UK Pacific and ANZAC and American options, as well as execute battle in China to retake Yunnan. I think the most common option for purchases under these opening moves, I'm going to go ahead and put those on the board and discuss them. I'll put the buys over here on my build cards. ANZAC is going to buy 3 infantry or 2 infantry and an artillery. If they purchase 2 infantry and an artillery, I think they can get up to a 58% chance of defeating your landing force in Queensland, including your 3 fighter scramble from the carriers. However, if they fail, then you'll basically be able to walk into their capital very easily, since you'll have so many transports coming down on round 2 to the Carolines to reinforce for the crush on turn 3. I've seen a couple different buys as the United Kingdom. A very popular one is 3 infantry, 2 artillery. I like that one a lot. 1 infantry, 1 artillery, and 1 fighter is also, I would say, fairly common to see. And then lastly, 4 infantry and a marine, I would say is the third next most likely. The advantage of the marine is that they'll most likely be bringing the battleship all the way back to Sea Zone 40 and then sending it over to the Med, depending on how you position your fleet, how aggressive you are, and how well Italy is doing. So part of this strategy is trying to give Italy breathing room in the Med by drawing resources to India, because Japan will be so free roaming in the Pacific. Lastly, the American buy almost always involves 2 carriers in the Pacific. Sometimes I'll see a battleship, since there's a build limit of 3. Other times you'll see like a destroyer, and then building a fighter in the eastern United States, which has the flexibility to either fly over to Sea Zone 27 or 28, and land on a carrier there. That's also a very good buy, in my opinion. And then moving over the infantry and artillery, and I personally try to avoid taking mechanized infantry and tanks into the Pacific as the United States. I prefer to use those in Africa. Okay, on average, the Chinese can get away with taking 4 infantry and the fighter into Yunnan, and your defenders will only score 1 hit. So I've shown 3 surviving infantry in Yunnan, consolidating the rest of the infantry in Qinghai and Sichuan. And then this stack of 4 infantry are your fresh reinforcements as China. Out of all of the positioning, the British have the most dynamic setup. They're going to be able to swing that transport over to southern Persia to activate it, to reinforce the Middle East. They could also come down here and start picking up the Dutch East Indies for some extra income. ANZAC is pretty much limited to using a blocker. Potentially could use the American blocker here, but regardless of which ship you use, they will have to retreat all of their forces to New South Wales. They might try something cute with the fighters, land them over here on Java to reinforce a British landing either in Sumatra or Java. But basically, there is nothing that ANZAC and the UK can do, especially with a 6 bid for Japan, but even without it, to prevent Japan from taking New South Wales on turn 3. Okay, another option that the ANZAC forces have is to withdraw quite a few units and help the British hold the Dutch East Indies. Here I have 2 ANZAC infantry and 3 fighters on Java. This makes Java a very tough nut to crack. It's not your goal as Japan anyways, on turn 2. The goal of Japan on turn 2 is to take Queensland. That is your #1 goal. Everything else is ancillary. Most likely, you're going to be declaring war on all allies. The only time I would not declare war on all allies is if the Americans have left a blocker here, the ANZAC have not, and the ANZAC for some reason have maybe stacked Queensland, or split their units between Queensland and New South Wales. And this is really just something that a newer player would make a mistake on, but Japan is not required to declare war on the Americans. So if you see this, you can bring your entire fleet by just declaring war on the UK and ANZAC right past this sea zone, right past this destroyer, into sea zone 64, sorry. And you can unload everything on New South Wales. And even if they have 3 fighters here in Queensland to scramble, if all they left here were the 2 or 3 infantry that they built, maybe even an AA gun, if that's all they had, the benefit of having this carrier here with these 2 planes is that it can hit. You have 6-7 ground units with the cruiser and 2 planes to attack this. And there's a good chance that you can capture it. You could, if you were really, I doubt that would be the most efficient move, but that is something you could do. Generally, you're going to want to take the Philippines, at least Davao, Kwangtung, Borneo, and Queensland. That's the focus of this strategy. All right, I'm going to assume for a moment that ANZAC, perhaps slightly blind to the danger or out of desire to have a little bit more money to build on round 2, has sent the transport here with 1 infantry to take Java. UK Pacific has come down and taken Sumatra, and probably has one of these fighters here, perhaps the entire Air Force down here. If I was going to take Sumatra with the Japanese there, I personally wouldn't feel the need to have the whole Air Force there, but some people do it just to make sure that there aren't any shenanigans going on here. And they'll also move forward all the East Indy infantry, that guy's going to Baluchistan, into Burma. So, what are our moves as Japan? Well, we're going to put everything that can hit Queensland into Queensland. And then we should also have 3 transports up north. So let me go ahead and make those moves. And 4 transports up north, and I will pick back up. Okay, I wanted to discuss the transport situation. So you buy 4 transports and an infantry on round 1. And I like to put at least 1, but probably 2 into Sea Zone 6. Just gives you some extra flexibility on which units to take. I also leave 4 or 5 infantry in Korea. So if you have 2 transports here, you can take 1 or 2 infantry off Korea. And we're going to bring those down here, and we're going to drop off 2 infantry each in Davao and Manila. Does kind of depend. Sometimes the Americans might move both infantry to protect one territory, in which case you can just focus on this territory, Davao, since it has a airbase and a harbor. Apparently I didn't put the harbor out, that's my bad, but it does have a harbor. This transport that you brought down with the armor and the infantry on round 1, you're going to move 1, 2 up to Guam, take this infantry off Marianas and move him onto Guam. To capture that denies the Americans the NO. That transport is also safe since this fighter, assuming it moves to Wake by 1, 2, 3 and doesn't have a landing spot. Again, that's assuming both of these are getting taken. I moved the cruiser that we moved down on round 1 back up with the assumption that I'm buying an extra Marine this round. This other transport up here, you have one that can take an infantry and an artillery to land in Borneo. Sorry for my arm being in the way. And then I'll use the last one on non-combat movement to bring 2 more infantry down into Guangxi. Over here, we've brought the majority of the fleet, landed in Queensland. In this example, it's an uncontested landing. Anything that did get left there is definitely going to be destroyed. Over here, with how I've chosen to have the allies set up, as I think it is the most realistic spot for their fleet to be if they put it in a forward position. It's still not a threat to you. If they move it into 38, which is this space here that has the harbor, that's not a great spot for them since you can hit it with the starting units here. There was a sub here as well. You could attack as well as with 2 bombers, 1, 2, 3. And you could actually attack with the aircraft, the fighter and the tacticals, because you had a carrier over here, at least one, that can move 1, 2, 3 and pick up the planes from this sea zone. So they aren't going to leave it in 38, assuming you have 1 carrier here in 35. That is basically the first 2 rounds of the ANZAC Crush. I would love to get some feedback. I'm just filming this on my phone. I don't have a camera stand or anything fancy. And I apologize for some of the lighting. There's probably some glare, but I hope you guys enjoy the video, and I look forward to doing more of these in the future.